The world's worst blizzard rages outside. The temperature is 40 below zero, and 1873 Philadelphia is in the grips of a yellow fever epidemic. Death stalks the city and mobs roam the streets looking for someone to blame. The perfect setting for a horror story, right? Yep, that's the world that writer and director Eli Roth sets for the period piece The Last Matinee, a new movie based on the legend of the tragic final performance of a supernatural Penny Dreadful show. Hi, I'm here to talk about horror movies. And last week, members of the press got a chance to sit down with Roth and some of the cast of The Last Matinee. And thanks to our friends at Bloody Disgusting, I was able to join them via Zoom. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, I wasn't able to ask Roth my question, but I will do that later. Anyway, let's talk about my favorite moments from the interviews. So, Roth makes a point of saying that he loves period pieces, but also that he's not making a period piece here, as the film uses supernatural elements to connect to the present. I really appreciate that clarification. I think sometimes when you hear period piece, you expect something stuffy or dry, and that's definitely not the case here. Period piece is a genre unto itself, one filled with exceptional costume design, production design, score. And this is a horror film that doubles down on all of those things. The Last Matinee looks gorgeous, and I know that horror is Roth's bag, but I was happy to see that he clearly has a deep love of cinema woven through all of his work. He actually opens the conversation by thanking Quentin Tarantino for giving him a job on Cabin Fever because it taught him how to direct. And he goes on to name other directors whose work has influenced him. But I think the one that matters most to this movie is definitely Guillermo del Toro. Both movies are period pieces set in a snowy town where people feel besieged by forces beyond their control. Both lean heavily into the tone and atmosphere. And both films use fantastical creatures that become symbols of the evils that plague the townspeople. Speaking of Del Toro, Roth says that he pitched this movie to Legendary, and the studio wanted him to take it in a darker direction. The initial pitch was for something lighter, but as he continued to work on the project, he realized that it should be darker, more tragic, ultimately connecting the film to real historical horrors. In particular, he points to the actions of mobs against minority groups during epidemics, citing the 1866 anti-Irish riot in Philadelphia. He also brings up the racism and xenophobia that fueled the 1918 Tulsa race massacre. The mob mentality that those events represent become the film's central theme. The plot follows a group of young actors who travel to Philadelphia in 1873 to put on a show. The show is loosely based on the penny dreadfuls of the era, sensational melodramas that were hugely popular in Victorian England and America, and like the stories that inspired them, the show deals with supernatural themes. Now, this being a period piece, we're going to talk about costumes and props, so I'm going to pause the transcript for a second to mention the sponsor of today as episode Art of the Title. If you haven't seen it already, check out the review of the designs for Stranger Things 4, and be sure to browse the other incredible artists featured on the site. All right, let's get back to the interview. The show the traveling company performs is called The Last Matinee and stars James, played by Miles Robbins. James is billed as a man-killer who has escaped an insane asylum to take revenge on the doctor who institutionalized him. James also has powers. Like the Dr. Jekyll of Robert Louis Stevenson's Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, James fights against the evil in himself, except unlike Jekyll, James loses his fight. The play becomes a curse for the actors who perform it, causing tragedy to befall anyone connected to the production. Roth notes that putting this film together was like building a house of cards. Every department head brought their best work, knowing that if any one of them failed, the whole thing would come tumbling down. Roth wanted to evoke the styles of old horror films like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu, but he also wanted to infuse the film with the aesthetic of classic musicals. The main example he cites is Singin' in the Rain, which famously depicts the transition from silent films to talkies. He also cites the film's production numbers, which borrow from the choreography of Gene Kelly. Now, I don't know much about musicals, but I have seen Singin' in the Rain, and I agree there's definitely a connection. Here's the difference I see between the two. In Singin' in the Rain, there's a conflict between the new and the old. Ultimately, the new wins out. Talkies are here to stay, and for all the melancholy of the story, there's an overall optimism to the film. Roth's film isn't about change. It's about loss. The music doesn't drive the plot. The plot drives the music. In other words, it's not about dance numbers, it's about dancing in the snow. The musical numbers here are born out of desperation. The joy is gone, and all that remains is a haunting, melancholic beauty. This is a big deal for me because I've always found musicals cloying. I know it's wrong, but I just can't get past the talking and the dancing. But I did not mind this. I love this. And if you're watching this movie, you're going to love the soundtrack. Another big fan of the film was cinematographer Nathan Meister, who was responsible for recreating the look of older films. Meister studied the lighting and color schemes of German Expressionism and early Soviet cinema to develop the film's visual style. He chose to shoot on 35mm film, which helps achieve the desired effect. More importantly, though, is the film's use of light. A lot of horror movies will use darkness for cheap scares, but those shadows serve a purpose here. They're not there to hide things that scare us. They're there to reveal things we already fear. This is a master class in lighting. The actors are never lost in the shadows. They're illuminated perfectly.